The goal of a business is total profit. So number one KPI is not profit margin, it's total profit. Much rather have 20% of a watermelon than 50% of a grape. So that to me is the number one KPI for the entire business. That lucro actually means profit in Italian. For marketing, it's ROI. How much are you spending? How much are you getting out? Operational KPI. This is what I think is the number one missing statistic or KPI in the entire chiropractic profession. I've actually never met a doctor clinic that's ever tracked it, and it's what I call percentage of schedule filled. This is one of the leading ways that I know when to hire, who to hire, how much to spend. This is understanding your capacity of your clinic, your hours, your staff, and your location. What is the capacity that you're already paying for? Again, clarity, confidence, and certainty is what these KPIs allow you to achieve.
Josiah Fitzsimmons, welcome to the Marketing Your Practice podcast. How are you, my friend?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Buddy, it's lovely to have you on here. First question I'm going to ask with, what's it like growing up in a family of 9 kids?
Fighting for seconds, competitive, sleepovers every night. You learn a lot at a fast pace, where you stand and what you got to do to stand out.
What number were you in the 9?
Right in the middle, 5 out of 9.
Yeah. I was listening to some of your trainings beforehand. One of the things that stood out for me, as a young boy, you would get up at 2:30 in the morning and you would go and deliver newspapers with your mum. Where did that drive come from? Most kids are not going to do that. Because remind me, how old were you when you started doing that?
3rd grade.
Yeah. And so that's 10 or less?
Yeah, 9. My son's in 3rd grade right now. He's 9. So
yeah. So at 9, you were getting up at 2:30 in the morning and working for 3 or 4 hours to deliver papers and then come back. Tell me more about what that experience was like.
yeah, I mean, at the time, my mom was single mom with 3 kids. At that point in our lives, and she needed help to pay the bills, and she asked me, and honestly I thought it was fun. That's something I've really reflected on over the years about myself, is I really enjoy working and accomplishing and achieving and getting things done. And during the time I never really viewed it as work. It was like, yeah, I get to wake up, I get to meet new people, deliver newspapers. Sometimes we'd, get to go to Hardee's or something, for breakfast or something, and that was really it. At that age, that's all it was to me. My teachers couldn't believe I'd already worked 4 hours before I went to school, but for me, that was just my normal. And so really never thought of anything, but I really feel that helped lay the foundation, for my work ethic and, just appreciation for accomplishing and knocking things off the plate.
Because what you've been able to achieve in your practice and then in your businesses and a real estate portfolio. Do you mind me asking, how old are you now?
35.
Yeah, what you've been able to achieve is extraordinary. That work ethic that obviously started at such a young age, and the idea of seeing it as fun rather than as toil, is that kind of part of the foundation that's allowed you to do all of this?
I definitely believe so. I read Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, for anybody who's read that, book, about 3 years ago. And that's really where I was trying to figure out, what is my purpose? What really drives me? And my ultimate conclusion was that I really enjoy the journey. I really enjoy the process, climbing to the top of a mountain. Like when you get to the top, for me, it's like, where's the next peak? You've heard celebrities when they finally make it, that's just like, this is all there is. And so I think I've really realized that I really enjoy the climb, the journey, the day to day, and that I find a lot of enjoyment out of that. And so just really, if you love what you do, you're never going to work a day in your life. That used to be my quote, at the end of my email signature early on in practice. And that's really how I feel like, what can I do every day that I enjoy to do, find enjoyment, whether it be delivering newspapers. My family, my cousins were all farmers, scraping pig pens, for 50 cents. All that stuff. I always enjoyed it, and I still to this day I find a lot of enjoyment just out of work.
Has it always been that way, or did you go through the journey of setting goals, reaching it, and then going, this is not quite as good as what I thought it would be?
I didn't really, honestly. I've never been, and that was part of the reflection of why I read the book, because I've always had a hard time of setting goals of what do I really want to do, or what am I striving to achieve, or what's the goal that I want to get to, what's the end point of all this work that I'm trying to do. And when I tried to do that, I really couldn't come up with a finite finish line, and that was really a big part of that reflection, that journey and self-consciousness of that, understanding myself better, that I was like, man, I don't really get enthusiased by crossing the finish line. I get really excited about the process.
And can you remember learning that anywhere as a child? Was that kind of inbuilt to you? Has there been kind of mentors along the way that have continued to kind of really fertilize that idea?
Yeah. I wish I had this great, epiphany moment, to tell you, but I feel like I don't have I don't have that lightning struck, moment. It's just, like I said, I didn't even realize that was in me until honestly a few years ago when I read Man's Search for Meaning, and I was really just trying to uncover some of those things within myself. I self-discovered that I'd been operating in that manner unknowingly, for an extended period of time.
You mentioned in some of your previous trainings that it was, and you touched on it before, that it was tough growing up in a family of nine, and there wasn't a lot of money, and getting up at 2 o'clock, and you know, fighting for seconds and those type of things. That lack of money and availability as a child there too, has that been a key drive for you to get to where you are now?
Absolutely. I feel that there's always an opportunity to improve the situation that you're in. And I feel like I really realized that, at an early, age, and then once I started having kind of a taste of success, with that job, I negotiated, with my mom that, hey, I'd like to make $10 a day. What is that? $3, about $3 an hour.
Yeah.
And, so I ended up making about $300 a month, in third grade. And so, I bought my own bike, I bought my own clothes, I bought my own PlayStation, and I was able to purchase a lot more things than my siblings, with my own money. And then when I went and got older, my mom got remarried. He had 4 kids. Then they had two more together. That's how we get to nine. And
Yeah.
then he made just enough money to that I had was going to get no scholarship help, or no couldn't get student loans. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't got enough money to pay for school. I can't get student loans. I got to get a full ride scholarship. And so I was like, hey, what am I good at? What am I talented at? At that point, I just started getting a little bit better at football by my sophomore year in high school. And I was like, man, I think if I just dedicate myself for the next 2 years to learning how to be the best at football, maybe I could get a scholarship. And I studied my own nutrition. I studied exercise, just all on my own. Bought my own protein powder. Um, Bought one of those sweatsuits that you're like look like a electric to lose weight one time. I mean, I just did it all myself and got a full ride scholarship for Division I football. And that, like I said, and that was another kind of like notch where I was like, okay, I set my mind on a goal. I put in the work, I put in the effort, and I achieved it. And so, you know, that's kind of just been, you know, come to fruition, that I say, hey, this is what I want to do. And like I said, I know we're talking about, not really setting kind of next level goals, but that's something that I've really found out, whatever I want to accomplish, put in the right amount of time, effort, and energy, as well as working smarter. And that's something that I've really tried to be the hardest worker and the smartest worker in the
Mm,
room, because I think
mm.
that's paramount to have both of those. You can work really, really hard, not get very far. You can be the smartest person and don't put in the work. Either way, you're not going very far. But if you can really combine those two into one, then, you can achieve great things.
How do you reconcile this with so you've got 3 kids of your own. Um, so you grew up with lack and in some challenging times, and it built a real resilience. And I'm assuming here that your kids don't have that same lack as well. How do we give that? Because I know as a parent too of three kids, is that sometimes it's natural for me to want to shield them from pain and difficulty to make the
Yeah.
ride a little bit kind of easier. But you can see the tremendous strengths and skill sets and characteristics that you've built from something that was quite tricky. Do you think, and how do you reconcile that with your kids?
Totally agree with you. I've had that conversation with my wife, on numerous occasions of how do we artificially, make life harder? How do we just not give them what we could give them, and purposely saying no or purposely withholding and purposely, making them work for what they earn, whether it be picking up the house, doing chores, cleaning, just more commonly than not saying no. It's actually really funny. My 9-year-old, 4-year-old, they caught on that, most of the time they ask a question, I say no. But, if they, when they want something, right? And then last night they asked me a question and I said, maybe. And they celebrated. They said, not a yes, not a no, not a no, not a no. And they were celebrating. And I was like, why are you celebrating? I said, I didn't say yes. I said, maybe. And they said, not a no. Like, hey, at least we got a chance. So yeah, I mean, I think it's something that I still want to continue to refine, continue to have opportunities. I think, hard work, I think manual physical labor is definitely a great entry point, to that. If you can really control your body and physical, then I think, controlling your mind, is going to definitely be easier.
Mm. You've achieved some pretty amazing things very quickly in practice. And so uh, we'll talk some revenue numbers in a moment. And so for our listeners, you know, some of what Josiah's been able to achieve actually hurts my brain a little bit. And what's lovely about it is I'm like, if somebody can get that much, I can get half of that, like at least there too. So your practice in the end there too, revenue was north of $7 million a year. Is that right?
Just under 7 million last year. Yeah.
Just under seven. And so can we break how many docs, how many staff was that?
So yeah, we have 8 doctors and 24 total staff.
Yeah. And so in your first year, because I'll take that back too, in your first, you built a seven-figure practice in your first 12 months.
Yeah. First year we did 1.2 million.
And that was how many docs and how many staff?
So started off with me, and then I hired my first associate after 6 months. So it was just me for the first half, and then second doctor, and we had 3 staff.
Yeah. So you hired your first associate 6 months. Now, you went straight into your own business as well? You didn't kind of associate with anybody else?
Nope, opened my own clinic 4 months after I graduated, and I already had over 400 prepaid appointments actually before my first day open.
Why don't we talk about that? Where did they come from? How did you have, imagine walking into, for most people, the fear of starting up a new practice is the idea that it's going to be quiet for a while. Imagine if you could open a business and know that there was 400 people waiting for you. How did you do that?
Yeah, that was a big part of my journey in chiropractic school. So I went to play football in college. My grandma, very old school, she's like, hey, if you're gonna be a doctor, you need to be a medical doctor. That's the quote pinnacle of society, is what she told me. And so I said, okay. So I was pre-med, was about to take the MCAT, got hurt, went to this local chiropractor, and he's like, you can be a doctor and an entrepreneur. And I said, entrepreneur what? I don't even know what that word means. And he painted this picture, and we had another family friend that I called, and she's just like, paints this amazing opportunity of chiropractic and holistic lifestyle and being in control of your destiny. And I'm like, hey man, I'm gonna go have a great life. I'm gonna be a chiropractor. And so I went to chiropractic school. I love the holistic approach, but I also really was very interested in the business side of things. So when I went to chiropractic school, I had that already in my mind that I knew I needed to learn the business side of things. And so very quickly, obviously, learned in chiropractic school that that's not core part of the curriculum. And so I was like, okay, I need to seek outside counsel, doctors that are already in practice that are being very successful. And so I found very quickly that a lot of doctors want help with screenings or events, and they'll bring students out. And so second or third trimester, I went this doctor had me come out and I did a screening event at a home show. Maybe 500 people came to this whole home show, and I scheduled 99 appointments, paid appointments,
Wow.
for this doctor, paid appointments in a weekend. And he was like, "How did you do that?" You know? And he's like, "I got to tell all my friends that they need to bring you out for the help with their shows." So I ended up getting 3 to 4 requests a week for the rest of my, weekends in school, and I ended up going over 50 clinics while I was a student. And you know, after a little while, I was like, okay, like I can help these doctors, but what can I learn from them? Try to find the best doctors that I could really grow and learn knowledge from. I try and come on a Friday or stay till a Monday and shadow them in the office, try and learn the systems, operations. My first son was born when I was at Palmer. My wife and him started coming with me. He went on 18 plane rides before he was 1 year old, all paid for by these doctors that were bringing us out, and learned how to communicate, the mess of chiropractic. You learned, how to run the off systems in the office. And, so I was very confident, by the time I graduated of, what the systems I wanted to run, how I wanted to operate, how to deliver the best quality of care,
Mm.
and all those different aspects. And so, yeah, soon I had already negotiated my lease before I ever even graduated on my space that I was going to move into. And then, week after I graduated, I was joining all the local chambers events, and my wife and I averaged about 5 to 7 meetings or events per day for 4 months straight,
Wow.
with local business owners, chamber members, lunch and learns, screenings. That's all we did. The largest ribbon cutting in our city's history. And yeah, that's it was just one person at a time. We didn't have any big events like I had for that one guy. I think the biggest event we maybe ever had, besides our ribbon cutting before we opened, maybe generated 6 or 7
Mm.
appointments. So there were lots of just small micro events and in-person meetings that added up over time.
What are the keys of turning that meeting into an appointment?
Hmm. Biggest thing I would say is really figuring out what is that person's why. How is that, what is the pain point that's most bothering them, and connecting it to an outcome or a life effect that's going to have a dramatic impact, on their life, a reason greater than, just the pain. And so that's something that learned early on with being involved with different organizations in the profession, is really understanding people don't come in to the clinic because they have headaches. They come in because headaches don't allow them to play with their kids. They don't
Mm.
come in because they have back pain. They've come in because they can't work anymore, and that's affecting their income and their family, and they want to come in to help their family, not because they want to help their back pain. And so helping, have a short conversation with a potential patient and connecting those dots of, hey, this might be your health concern, but what is the impact on your quality of life? And
Mm.
really drawing that out in a 2 minute conversation, at a home show or over coffee or, anywhere that, you could meet somebody, trying to connect those dots and say, hey, we might potentially have a solution. Let's schedule you for, no, risk appointment to really come in, see what's going on, and see if we potentially can help you play with your grandkids better, because that's what really drives them.
And was there a secret, or what was the skill? Let's just say that you and I are catching up for coffee. I'm a local businessman in the same town there as well. Maybe we met at the Chamber of Commerce. How does it come up in terms of, because I know once people start to often talk about, listen, I've got headaches, that type of stuff, that next step chiropractors can be good. Tell me more. What's it stopping you from doing? All those
Yeah.
sorts of things there too. But when you're in a meeting like you and I catching up for coffee, how do we get the conversation started that I might have headaches or a problem? Where does
Yeah.
that begin?
So most of my, the appointments were never, created over coffee. That's really more of the initial point where you can say, hey, what does that person have going on? How can you impact them? How can you add value to them? How can you help, answer, be a resource, for them of your time, or energy. At that point, I don't got any money. So how can I be a resource to them, or what is their business looking for? How can I help get their business to grow? And so that's, really, I think just a law of reciprocity at that point.
Yeah.
That initial meeting, initial number of meetings, really not seeking anything in return and just really trying to give and add value to their life. And like I said, then maybe they'll come to my ribbon cutting in 4 months and make an appointment at that point. So most of the coffee style meetings, those appointments were rarely, if ever, booked at those. That was the get to know you. Hey, this is
Yeah.
love to learn more about your business. Oh, by the way, this is what I do. This is what I'm passionate about. And just
Yeah.
really starting that journey, in relationship.
Yeah. My experience is that chiropractors just move too quickly with that whole interaction. Um, most businesses have people reaching out to them. You know, in our practice, multiple times a week, we would have a new practitioner, whether it be a massage or a PT or a yoga studio, that would say, "Hey, look, we've just moved into town. If you want to send us patients, here's our details." And then one time, I had this young guy come in who was starting up a massage clinic, and he came in and said, "Hey, listen, I've started up a massage clinic around the corner." And I'm like, "Oh, here we go." And he goes, "I love chiropractic, and I love sending my patients to chiropractic. I think everybody should come and see a chiropractor. What sort of patients should I send you?" And I'm like, this kid's clever. So immediately he got my interest and we started chatting about it, that type of stuff there too. We built up a relationship, and he came in there wanting to serve my business as opposed to expecting a complete stranger to want to serve his. And, that same mistake kind of happens all the time from there too. So you start off with 400 new patients as well, but that doesn't guarantee a seven-figure business in the first 12 months. What were the other key things that you did throughout that period that allow you to have the success?
Really defining our business operations and systems. We really had very clear articulation, of the communication process from initial meeting at, X event or however that relationship started until, scheduling them an appointment. But then really from that point forward, how do we deliver an amazing experience? One of my favorite books on customer service is called Selling the Invisible, and in that book, he talks about what he calls the Disney experience. And it's a magical experience, where the sights, the sounds, the smells, everything adds up into this magical experience. And that's something that me and my wife, Megan, have really tried to articulate within our practice, not only for the patients, but also for our team members, as well as what are all the minor details that add up from that first interaction, till they're under care for life, that contribute to that place, whether it be, when they first come in, going around the front desk, and standing up and giving them a double-handed handshake. We don't have any phones at our front desk, because we only want our people to be focused solely on who's in front of them, mapping out, the flow of the office so that every step counts, and the efficiency, of the office. And, when people come in for their report findings, we give them a free T-shirt. When they come back for their at the end of their next care plan, they get a tumbler. When it's their birthday, they get a card in the mail. If they tell us that, they got a good report card, they're going to get a congratulations card in the mail. If they tell us their dog passed away, they're going to get a sympathy card in the mail. We have what we call in our office, we call it a card tracker. For any reason that we could possibly think of, we send them a card.
Uh-huh.
And so just all these little minor touch points, to create an incredible experience, whether the doctor be calling them after their first visit and checking in how their appointment went, follow-up process, whether they sign up, don't sign up, when they interact with us. Like I said, I tell us all the time for team members, team members or patients, they're in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And how can you have that then be a better person for the time that they were involved, in your life than when they
So,
first were.
yeah, so everything had a plan. There was nothing that was kind of ad lib in the practice. There was a process for what would happen in terms of communication on visit one and visit two. And the visit experience was kind of orchestrated and rehearsed and practiced. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah. We did a great job of articulating, what does that entire patient journey look like? and how do we try and over deliver at each points in that journey.
And in terms of the delivery of the chiropractic care, were there ancillary things that you had in there as well? Any therapeutics as well, or just adjustments?
Just yeah, adjustments, exams, x-rays.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So this practice, in terms of going along, I would imagine that there have been different things that you've had to learn. Like we get to seven figures there. Um, where was the next big lesson in terms of growth that you had to overcome to kind of jump forwards?
Yeah, I would say the next big inflection point was jumping from 2 million a year to 5.5 million a year. And that for me, the biggest inflection point that really was able to scale was the structural component of really understanding who's accountable for what within our organization, what are the KPIs that every team member needs to be responsible for, what's the primary purpose and primary skills of each team member, and like I said, what is the proper expectations that needs to be for each team member, what is the agreements, of what they're supposed to do, and then what's the rhythm and the feedback loop of what's working, what's not working, what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and challenges of all the different facets of the business, and being able to then refine that down into what is the number one thing that takes the least amount of work that's going to have the greatest impact on the business. And that was a really big growth moment for me, where I actually started studying outside the profession. That's when I was like, well, what companies grow the fastest, seemingly go from nothing to billion-dollar companies overnight? And most people probably instantly think of tech companies. And in the tech world, they have incredible processes where they evaluate every 2 weeks what's working, what's not working, and they're always trying to then figure out what is that number one thing that's going to take the least amount of work, that's going to have the greatest impact, and they're very willing to pivot and to whatever that thing may or may not be. And what I realized is most business owners, chiropractors, they go down the same path for months, maybe even years, before they realize they should have had a left turn, 2 years ago. And so I really think of it's like data is like your business compass, telling you, every single minute, hour, day, week, quarter, where should you turn? When should you pivot? When should you make a right instead of a left, or keep going? And being able to have the proper loop of feedback, of information, to then make the best decisions.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the KPIs? So let's just, I'm interested particularly in front desk staff, for instance, that would have KPIs. What are the measuring cycles of that? And then what are the reporting cycles? So, how often is that coming to management? And then is there a quarterly review, a monthly review with that person? This is somewhere where I see lots of chiropractors get stuck. They get to that stage and go, great, here's our KPIs across, but then there's no accountability for them per se. And I often say to people, if there's a KPI without accountability, that's the same of having, a subject at school where there's no exam. That we stop studying for it straight away when there's
Yeah.
no accountability. So, how do we bring that together? We've got systems across who's accountable for what. Here's your KPIs, their expectations. Now the measuring and reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a weekly rhythm, for our meeting rhythms. We close our entire office down on Tuesdays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. just for team meetings, trainings, and one-on-ones, which is where every team member gets a direct meeting with their department head. What's going well? What can be done better? And how can we help support them in their growth? And we have our dreams, have what we want our business to help us accomplish as owners, but how can our team members use our company, our organization, as a vehicle to accomplish their own dreams? And as you grow through the journeys of size of team, the KPIs are going to be, they're going to be different, and also based on what your team members do. Like I said, for us, we don't have phones at the front desk. They don't do the reminder or the confirmation calls. So at first, my front desk team members, when I was a small team, they were more involved with confirmation calls and making people showed up on time. Well, now we have another person that does that. So what was the KPI, for the front desk at a smaller team, now isn't a KPI for the front desk now. And so that's one of the biggest lessons I learned from a KPI standpoint, is don't just do what someone else does. You really need to evaluate what your current positions are within your organization
Mm.
and what does that position have the most control over? Because you might think, well, this person should be accountable for that. Well, if they can't have as a large impact on that the success or failure of that KPI, it's going to be a very frustrating experience, for you and them. They're either going to get rewarded for something they shouldn't be rewarded for, or they're going to be, torn down or in trouble for
Penalized.
something they couldn't control. So that would be, I would say, is really number one would be identifying on your current team, depending on where you're at, how many team members, each individual position or individual team member, what do they have the greatest control of? What do they have the greatest influence on changing? And that's really where I would start from that standpoint, and then maybe there are some very important KPIs that you feel like, and no one's really monitoring or has the best control of. It's a very mixed role. And just like you said, if no one's accountable, if not one person's accountable, no one's accountable. And so
Mm.
really identifying, well, maybe that person doesn't have the most control, but a lot of people are impacting this KPI. So I'll make this person in charge, and their job might necessarily not be to do that task itself, but they're overseeing all the people that do that add up to that task. So yeah, really refining what your most crucial KPIs are, who has control of them, and then assigning accountability to those, people is very, very crucial because I made the mistakes, early on with assigning KPIs exactly like I just talked about.
Mm. If there were five pieces of data that you could measure in your practice and only five, what would they be? What are the most important things to track?
Man, it's just literally this was not planned whatsoever between me and you, but I this last weekend, I was like, man, we have a lot of KPIs in my clinic, and sometimes
Yeah,
team members can get a little overwhelmed, and which ones truly matter. And so I actually have it literally sitting right beside me.
nice.
I actually went into it, but overall, organization, business, the goal of a business is total profit. So number one KPI is not profit margin, it's total profit. Much rather have 20% of a watermelon than 50% of a grape. So that to me is the number one
Yeah,
KPI for the
yeah,
entire business is total profit. That lucro actually means profit in Italian.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Nice.
for marketing, it's ROI. It's, how much are you spending? How much are you getting out? My biggest thing right off the cuff for doctors is you got to have this equation memorized. It's the simplest marketing equation you're ever going to have. It's going to change your entire mindset on marketing. It's a simple formula. It's 100 divided by your profit margin. So let's just say your profit margin is 40%. 100 divided by 40 is 2.5. That's the minimum. That's the break even point. If you spend $1,000 on marketing, you need 2.5 return or $2,500 to break even. If you have a 50% profit margin, you need $2,000. If you have a 33% profit margin, you need 3x. 20%, you need 5x. This is the number one thing that I tell doctors from a marketing perspective: free up your mind. Free up your mind of what's possible. If you know 100 divided by your profit margin, that's your break even point. Anything above that is profitability. And so
So let
that
me
leads
just
into
clarify.
my, yeah,
Dive. So that's what comes in with our return on investment. So it means for every, if it is that, if my profit margin is 40, and then we come to that number of 2.5, my return on investment needs, for every dollar I put in, I need to be getting 2.5 out. Is that correct?
that's the break even point. So you won't make any
Yes.
money. That's your break even
Yeah.
point. So anything above that is profit.
Yeah.
And I've really found out along my entrepreneurial journey, the biggest thing that really, I wouldn't say haunted me, but that I felt like I was always trying to solve was that I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I felt there was always this never ending quest to find things that were hidden to me or unknown to me because I had no entrepreneurial background. I hadn't worked at some big Fortune 500 company. I'd never been a C-suite executive. I'd never
Mm.
known all these things. So I felt like I was always on this continual journey, of what's behind that door, what's behind this door, what's these unknown things
Mm.
that I'm just oblivious to, and I'm having opportunity costs because I don't know what I don't know. And, this is one of the, like I said, I think that really creates lots of hesitancy with decisions. It creates a lot of lack of decisions or no decisions or, just continuing down the same path because you know what the path is. But
Mm.
if people knew some of these basic frameworks, then confidence, the clarity, the certainty with decisions is really, to me, one of the most powerful ways to grow and scale is when you have confidence and certainty. Um, I always joke in America, we obviously have crooked politicians. Nancy Pelosi is a big one, and she always knows what the best stocks are to invest because she has inside
Hmm.
information. And
Yeah.
so that's really how I feel that KPIs are for your business. That's the insider trading. If you understand the KPIs of your business, then you can make insider trading and you can make decisions and outperform way better than the market because you know the data to know what best decisions to make.
Okay. So we've got total profit. And when it comes to return on investment, their marketing, we want to know what our profit margin is so we can work out what our break even is as far as our marketing. And so just to clarify, that was 100 divided by profit percentage. And again,
Yep,
that profit percentage is going to be total profit divided by revenue times 100. That's how we got that 40 number, for instance.
you got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Okay. So, all right. Next KPI.
Next one is operations, operational KPI. This is what I think is the number one missing statistic or KPI in the entire chiropractic profession. I've actually never met a doctor clinic that's ever tracked it unless I've told them about it. And it's what I call percentage of schedule filled. And this is it's an absolute game changer. It actually changed my entire way that I make decisions. Percentage of schedule filled is one of the leading ways that I know when to hire, who to hire, how much to spend. Uh, it's a massive metric, and what percentage of schedule filled is understanding your capacity of your clinic, your
Mm.
hours, your staff, and your location. What is the capacity that you're already paying for? So new patients is the easy one to use the example, but you want to know your percentage of schedule filled for all appointment types. So for new patients, for example, let's just say hypothetically a chiropractic clinic is open for 20 hours a week. They can process one new patient an hour, and so they could hypothetically see 20 new patients a week. I like to tell doctors, pretend there's 1,000 new patients just lined up at your front door. You don't change your hours, you don't change your staff, you don't change your location. How many of those new patients could you get through the front door in a week? All right. And let's just say easy math, 20 hours a week, one an hour, 20 a week. There's 4.3 weeks in a month. 4.3 times 20 is 86. So that's the new patient capacity for that clinic. All right, well, now how many new patients have you averaged in the last 6 months, 12 months? Let's just say it's 20. So then you would do 20 divided by 86, actual versus capacity. That comes out to about 23%. Let's say it's
Mhm.
40 new patients. 40 divided by 86, that's 46%. All right. So that is your percentage of schedule filled. So whether you have 100% of your schedule filled, 50%, 20% of your schedule filled, your rent doesn't change, your payroll doesn't change, your utilities don't change. All your expenses except the cost to acquire those new patients do not change at all. So if most
Mm.
all of your expenses don't change, right, but the big variable is, are you maximizing what you're paying for? You're going to pay the same amount whether, for that staff, whether there's someone's on their schedule or not on their schedule. You're paying the same for your rent. So that's the fastest way to maximize the revenue in your location, is to maximize all the expenses you're already paying for, right?
Mhm.
And so that's percentage of schedule filled. And you want to have percentage of schedule filled calculated for new patients, for adjustments, for any type of appointment type you have in your office. That is one of the most important stats that we review Monday morning every single week of the previous week. And like I said, that dictates, hey, we've been at capacity. We need to, for these appointment types, we need to hire this person. Hey, we're way under. We know that we're getting great ROI on these marketing spend. We can increase marketing spend very confidently because we know we're getting our ROI above the number I just talked about, and we have the schedule to maximize it. So again, clarity, confidence, and certainty, is what these KPIs, allow you to achieve.
Can you clarify for me there? So your average chiropractor, let's keep the math simple, who might be working 20 hours, but in that 20 hours, they need to service new patients, reports, adjustments, progress exams as well. And whilst I could see 20 new patients in that time, if I'm adjusting, say, 10 people an hour, whatever it is, that two, I've got 100. How do we work that out from that point of view when I've got multiple visit types that I'm seeing?
Sure. Yeah. And like I said, yeah, that's dependent on, that was an example, maybe that doctor, if he's doing all the adjustments and he has to do the initial consultation, he doesn't have, he's a very doctor versus a staff driven, clinic, then maybe his capacity is only 10, and so his total for the month is only 43, but maybe he's only averaging, 10 or 20, or 15 a month, you know. So I would say wherever you're at, whatever your current capacity is, that's a separate question. It's a great question, of how do you
Mm.
increase the capacity. But first and foremost, let's maximize the capacity you already have. So I love the question and I love, the opportunity to then improve the capacity, but most likely whatever capacity that they already have isn't being maximized. So let's not
100%.
jump to the next step of trying
Right.
increasing capacity when we're not even utilizing the capacity we have currently. So I would say first and foremost, current capacity, current hours, current structure, current scheduling system, whatever that is, that's nothing of that changes. What's your capacity? What percentage of it is being utilized? Okay, now how do we increase? Hey, we've been at capacity for X a period of time. Okay, now how do we increase capacity? What are things that the doctor's doing that a doctor doesn't need to do, that a staff, at a lower pay rate, could take off his plate? Are there we're only open for 20 hours a week, but we're paying, rent 24/7.
Yes.
Could there be more hours where staff could be there, whether a doctor doctor doesn't have to work anymore, but maybe the staff, could be open. Could you have an alternating lunch break with your two staff members so you don't have to close over lunch?
Yes.
So those are just then you start having good new problems. You have good problems. But I always say start with the simple, the most basic, least amount of work, greatest return. Always do those first and foremost. And I think lots of doctors that I've communicated with over the year, like, they want to overcomplicate it or they want to get shiny object. I could do this, I could do that, I could do this. Well, you could do a lot of things, but what's the one thing you should do?
Is there a number where you'd want to start to increase the hours of the doctor? Like, is it 80? Like, once we get to 80%, for instance, we need to open up more hours. Is it 90%? What is the number there?
Great question. So first and foremost, it's not usually an hours conversation. For most people, it's the next step is team. So,
Yes.
usually you need to either have, more efficient team members, train your team members better to increase capacity without changing any hours or team members. That's the
Mm.
easiest leverage, fastest leverage point that takes no more money and no more work, right? So creating more efficient, better trained team members. That's step number one. Then, you know, if those team members want to work more hours, then like I said, you could increase hours, right?
Mm.
Or, do you need more, additional team members, within your organization? So like I said, depending on where the bottleneck is it an adjusting bottleneck? Is it a day one bottleneck? Is which appointment type, or where is the exact bottleneck at of that percentage schedule? That's going to help dictate which employee, or aspect is going to need help with. Most of the time, the bottleneck for the doctors is themselves. They're doing
Yes.
so many different things, but maybe only a small percentage of their time you need a doctor's degree for. So
Mm.
that's usually the number one bottleneck that I would say. Um, you can Google delegate and elevate quadrant, and you can pull up a sheet. And I recommend doctors fill out that sheet every single month, and that helps categorize what they're great at, what they don't like to do, and really understand what things are the top leverage points that they could utilize. Ideally, someone already on their team to take something off of their plate, allow them to continue to do the next higher level activities.
Love it. Beautiful. Next KPI?
Next KPI is retention team, retention KPI. And so we actually renamed our doctor department the retention department. And so the number one KPI for that is churn rate. Okay. And so churn rate is actually, I got that from studying software companies like I talked about. This is the number one KPI in almost every software business. And churn rate is calculated by the number of dropouts divided by the number of active patients, or unique patients. So If someone comes in 3 times a week, or that only counts as one. They're one unique person. And so we calculate this KPI. You need a kind of a longer time horizon to get an accurate data point. So we calculate this on a monthly basis. What's the number of unique people that came into our office that are on a plan? Okay, so we don't want to count a new patient that may or may not sign up until they actually sign up. So number of active people active people. Uh, and then how many of those active people dropped out in the middle of a plan or didn't continue, at the end of a plan into a wellness plan or into the next step in their office. And so that is churn rate. And so really for that number, you really would love to get that under 3%. At a minimum, under 2% would really be phenomenal.
Wild. Love it.
And that's the
It's
best
really,
one that I found because it incorporates everything from a retention standpoint. Like I said, people staying under care, people dropping, out of care, number of people that, you could say, I had 10 people drop out. And the other doctor says, well, I had 10 people drop out too. Well, this person has 1,000 unique people and this one has 100 unique people. The number of dropouts is, this guy's doing way better. He could have,
yeah,
he could have 5 times more dropouts and he's still doing twice as good as the other guy,
yeah, yeah.
right? So that's where it's a much better than the just total number of dropouts, especially as you grow. You're like, hey, we used to only have 5 people. Now we have 20 people dropping out. It's like, well, we're 10 times bigger. So it's still substantially better.
And any reason why, and I think so, you've explained that too, you've chose that number as opposed to one that we typically talk about, which is just a PVA, patient visit average, new patients divided by, visits, or visits divided by new patients over time as well. Is that one that you've tracked beforehand or?
Yeah, we do track that one. That one it's tough to calculate that there's some basic rudimentary number of, patients divided by new patients. I don't think it's the most accurate measure from that standpoint. So it's up there. It's a good one to track.
Yeah.
But it's not my number one.
Okay. Last one.
All right. I got two more for you.
All right. Over
So
deliver.
sales.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so really this one, I really couldn't get it to one specific number. Obviously, the easy one is total revenue or total income.
Mm.
But one of my favorite numbers that we also track is revenue per patient as well.
Yeah.
So, uh, like I said, it's kind of a similar metric, where revenue is, great. Obviously, that's your top line,
Yeah.
but, what's the actual revenue per patient, what's the lifetime value, of a client that's massive.
Yeah.
And then the last one is what I can call a team metric, and that's the percentage of team members hitting their KPIs. And so
Nice.
this is our head management team director of operations. This is one of her number one stat KPIs on hers is the percentage of all of our team members cumulatively that are hitting their own
Yeah.
KPIs. So that's really, like I said, a management or a team statistic that says, you have great people in the organization that are being led well, that are being hitting their numbers, you know, on a consistent basis.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. I'm going to summarize those again for our listeners there. The first one was total profit. Then not as a percentage, but actual total profit. I really like that example of I'd rather have 50% of a watermelon than 80% of a grape. So that made sense there too. Marketing, we want to know our return on investment, and particularly we want to know that as our break even point. So that was 100 divided by your profit margin. Operations was percentage of a schedule filled. The retention KPI was churn rate that we looked at, and then the sales one to finish off, it was total income and revenue per patient. And then we had the team percentage of people hitting their KPIs there too. Um, Josiah, thank you. Like, just stunning to kind of look at. There's a couple there which Lauren and I will talk about afterwards in terms of things that we can kind of implement into our practice there as well. Hey, if our listeners want to find out more about the great work that you do, you touch base on Lucro, and perhaps can you take a couple of moments to share what it is that Lucro does and the work that you do with chiropractors?
Yeah, absolutely. As I grew my clinic, quickly over the years, so many doctors are saying, well, what are you doing? How are you doing this? Can you help me? Can I ask you a question? I've always been like, yeah, no big deal. I'll give you a call, answer a few questions. What I really found is lots of doctors, I would start asking them questions and I say, hey, well, tell me about your numbers. What's this number? What's that number? Most of them didn't know their numbers, but the ones even that did know them was said, well, is that good? What's the right margin? What's the right percentage? And even more importantly than knowing the data, I say that knowing the data is 1% value. Knowing what to do with the data is 99% of the value. And so I think we do a great job overall as a profession, coaching organizations, marketing organizations, EHR KPIs, marketing KPIs. That's something that I feel that our profession as a whole understands and knows, what actions to take. But the biggest KPI, the financial KPI that I just mentioned overall for the entire clinic is total profit, and that's derived from your bookkeeping. And what I found is that all the bookkeepers I had ever worked with over the year, they only really were providing value to me the one day a year that I filed taxes, right? And they were trying to help me make my taxable income as low as possible, which was great one day a year. But when I studied all these other businesses, when my business really took off, when studying these other businesses, I realized that they studied their financial data consistently and they made strategic financial business decisions from their bookkeeping, from their P&L every single month to grow and scale their business. And that was the first area that I looked at. They number one KPIs they filtered through would be what was their income, how much did they spend on team, marketing, overhead, what was the total profit of the business. Based on that assessment, what is the top area that we need to look deeper into that's going to have the greatest impact first and foremost. So that's what Lucro does is we do your bookkeeping. We actually have a designated team member who does your books every single week. And then we deliver a report by the 10th of every month that says, here's all your actual data. Here's your goal data. We do an annual strategic planning session where we evaluate your pricing, your protocol, your marketing, your team, your loans, your entire business, come with a whole game plan to scale your business. And then every month we give a report that says, here's your actual data, here's what you did, here's what you wanted to do. And then we also created what we call the perfect P&L for the chiropractic profession based on your monthly revenue. How much should you be allocating to each of those major bucket areas to optimize total profit of your business? And then we can deliver all that information every single month. And then we give you recommended action steps. You need to look deeper into these parts of your business that are going to have the greatest leverage point on scaling your business. And so we do everything, up to help you file your taxes. We don't do the taxes, but then that's just one day a year. Whereas we're going to be providing you value, all 365 days a year. And this is all a software you can log into. It's a beautiful displayed, easy to articulate and take actions to grow your business.
It's one of those things that I have realized in this last 12 months that those entrepreneurs that are further ahead in the journey for me have a financial platform that they look at daily. They're looking at their bank accounts and know where it's at there too. And, I went from looking at mine monthly and now putting systems in place where I can check them at least kind of weekly there too. And I can see that there would be value in checking it daily as well. Where is the best spot for people to find you and learn more about Lucro? And, there's some great resources you have on your website also.
Yeah, morelucro.com. Like I said, Lucro means profit, more profit. That's really our goal. But on our website, we have tons of resources. We call it the Vault. And so I've created lots of content of how I scaled my clinic to $7 million, marketing team, operations, systems, finance, a lot of those insights, and really give all that away for free right on our website. Schedule a call, with me, and you can definitely dive into your practice and see what those pivot points. But I like to be transparent. It's only $450 a month. If you pay annually, it's $375 a month. There's no sign-up fees. There's no contracts. I like to just be really transparent. We're going to provide 100 times more value than our cost, and we try to just make it the most absolute no-brainer decision for the chiropractic profession, because that's why I started it in the first place is, like I said, with what we talked about with my background, I've achieved more in my life than I ever, imagined I already would. My big purpose right now is uplifting our profession. Jesus and chiropractors, those are the top people that are called miracle workers in the world. We know we have the greatest healthcare product ever created, but why can't we get over this proverbial tipping point?
Yeah.
It's because we're great products, but we don't get the market out. Any other great product in the world, you see on every commercial, you see everywhere, about it. We're the best kept secret in the history of the world, right? So I think the big gap, like I said, was we went to school to become doctor, but we're running businesses. And so how do we bridge that gap and understand how to run a better business? And running a better business starts at its core with the financial data. That should be the foundational piece, to run a successful business and make a bigger impact.
Love it, buddy. Thank you for sharing so generously today. I've been looking forward to this chat since we organised it a month ago. Thanks for all that you do, mate. You're doing a tremendous job, and you're a leading light for many people in terms of possibilities. So I look forward to a round two sometime in the future too, Josiah. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.